Evelyn Marsh tightened her grip on the steering wheel as she navigated the winding forest road. Dawn light filtered through the dense fog, casting ghostly shapes across the narrow pavement. She'd been a park ranger for over a decade, yet the weight of solitude still lingered in the silence of these early hours. A faint memory of her daughter's laughter fluttered through her mind, as distant as a fading dream. Without warning, a shape emerged in front of her. Evelyn slammed on the brakes, tires screeching against the wet surface. The vehicle lurched to a stop. She caught her breath, heart pounding. In the swirling mist stood a lone elk calf, trembling on spindly legs. It stared at her with large, dark eyes. For an instant, Evelyn felt as though she were seeing a ghost. The calf's flank bore an X-shaped scar, barely visible beneath its mottled fur. It looked too young to be alone. She lowered her window and called out softly, "You shouldn't be here by yourself." The calf's ears twitched, but it did not run. Instead, it gazed at her with an uncanny stillness. Evelyn reached for her radio. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Marsh," she said, voice quiet. "I've got an elk calf acting strange on the south road, requesting guidance." The only response was static. She tapped the device, but the signal persisted in its faint crackle. A swift glance at her watch told her it was too early for a shift change. She tried once more. "Jake, come in, you there?" Nothing but a hollow hum. She turned off the engine and stepped out of the vehicle. The frigid air nipped at her cheeks and the ground felt damp beneath her boots. The fog clung to the trees like a living curtain. The calf took a shaky step backward, then stopped. Evelyn raised her hands, palms open to show she meant no harm. "Easy, little one," she murmured. The calf blinked and shifted on its legs, as if deciding whether to trust her. Then it limped a few paces deeper into the trees. Despite every protocol telling her to stay with the vehicle and wait for backup, Evelyn found herself following. Something pulled her forward. A quiet urgency in the animal's eyes, like it needed to show her something. She moved carefully between the tall pines, senses on high alert. The crisp smell of pine needles mingled with damp earth. A flicker of movement ahead told her the calf was still close. She tried the radio once more. "Jake, if you can hear me, I'm heading north off the main road. The calf's injured. Over." Silence greeted her again. A faint shape disappeared beyond a cluster of ferns. Evelyn's heart thudded in her ears. The air was thick with something more than fog. She remembered the day she lost her daughter, how helpless she had felt, how time had seemed to slow to a crawl. An ache bloomed in her chest, but she forced it down. She couldn't let the past paralyze her now. She took another careful step. The calf emerged briefly, glancing over its shoulder with an almost pleading look. Evelyn realized it was not just wandering, it was waiting. She continued after it, deeper into the haze. At the edge of a slope, the calf paused. Evelyn halted, surveying the ground below. A thin layer of ice coated the path, promising a dangerous descent. She heard the faint crackling of ice under her boots as she tested the weight. One wrong step could send her tumbling down the incline. The calf managed to pick its way across, muscles tense with each move. She tried to steady her breathing. The forest had grown unnaturally silent, as though holding its breath. A rustling in the branches above made her jump, only to reveal a squirrel darting away. Evelyn exhaled shakily. She glanced at the calf, whose gaze locked on hers again. "Okay," she whispered, more to herself than to the animal. "I'm with you." The wind stirred, scattering loose needles across her path. One step at a time, Evelyn followed the calf onto the slippery trail. Her heart hammered with every careful move, the threat of a fall looming. The quiet pressed in around her, amplifying her own ragged breathing. Still, she pressed on. Ahead, the calf came to a stop and looked back. Evelyn felt a prickle of unease. It was as though the animal was asking her to keep faith, to trust a path that was leading her away from the safety of her vehicle, and possibly deeper into danger. She reached a cluster of rocks where the ground evened out, grateful for a momentary reprieve. She lifted the radio to her lips again, voice subdued. "Jake, if you can hear this, I'm off the main road, half a mile north. following an elk calf with a strange scar, likely injured. Over. Nothing. She gritted her teeth. The calf blinked at her, then ventured forward. She took one last look over her shoulder at the vanishing outline of her truck through the fog. An uneasy feeling settled in her chest, yet she couldn't turn back. As she moved on, the wind hushed, and the forest seemed to watch her with silent eyes. Then, with a final wave of its head, the calf continued into the swirling white haze, leaving Evelyn to wonder what she would find if she followed. She took a steadying breath, steeled her resolve, and stepped forward. Evelyn braced herself against the cold as she trudged along the narrow trail. The fog remained thick, clinging to the pines and draping the forest in quiet dread. Every so often she caught a glimpse of the calf's hindquarters, that faint scar flashing against the muted palette of green and gray. She knew protocol by heart. Wait for backup. Do not pursue wildlife off marked trails alone. Report any unusual sightings immediately. Yet here she was, radio silent, forging ahead on little more than instinct. The forest felt alive in a way she had seldom experienced before, as though it were breathing with her every step. A brittle branch cracked underfoot, sending a jolt through her body. She paused, scanning the tree line for any sign of predators. Mountain lions sometimes roamed these parts, especially when food grew scarce. The calf, however, pressed on. It limped, favoring one hind leg, but never slowed enough for Evelyn to close the distance. She tried the radio again, her voice hushed. "Jake, can you hear me?" Static played in her ear. She exhaled, the fog carrying her breath in wisps. "Come on," she muttered to the silent radio, feeling a flicker of frustration. Then to the calf, "You'd better know where you're leading me." Only the soft crunch of pine needles responded. She pushed away thoughts of what might be waiting ahead. Thoughts of risk and a memory of a night spent in a hospital corridor, begging for a miracle that never came. Guilt tore at her now, hinting that she might be projecting her need to save a lost creature onto this calf. She couldn't save her daughter, but maybe she could save this small life. A gust of wind stirred the treetops, shaking droplets of moisture onto her jacket. She tasted the tang of damp earth and felt it cling to her hair. The path began to descend into a small ravine, its sides slick with rain-soaked leaves. She focused on each step, hands occasionally reaching out to grasp a low-hanging branch. Her throat felt dry. She glanced ahead, catching sight of the calf standing still at the bottom of the slope. It looked up at her, ears twitching. She swore it was waiting. A pang of empathy cut through her. "Where's your mother?" she asked, her voice echoing off the looming trunks. "Why are you alone?" Silence pressed back, broken only by the distant drip of water from leaf to leaf. Evelyn used a fallen log as a makeshift bridge to cross a narrow stream. Once across, she found the calf had moved only a few steps forward. When she reached it, she saw the tremor in its body. She took off her glove and touched its flank lightly. The calf flinched but did not bolt. Its heartbeat felt rapid beneath her fingertips. She murmured, "We'll get you help." The words felt odd on her tongue, as if comforting a child. Then she remembered how she used to calm her daughter after a bad dream. The ache inside her chest tightened. She pulled away gently and slipped her glove back on. The calf blinked, took a few steps ahead, then paused. Evelyn followed, careful to keep her distance. Moss-covered boulders lined the path and tree roots tangled across the ground like sleeping serpents. She nearly tripped twice, but the calf seemed to navigate the terrain with uncanny ease, limp and all. An unexpected crackle erupted from her radio. She grabbed it, hopeful. "Evelyn?" The voice was faint, but it brought a spark of relief. "Jake," she said, pressing the button. "I'm here." The response was jumbled, lost in static, and then it was gone. She cursed under her breath and tapped the radio. No use. She pressed onward, the calf guiding her like a silent guardian through the undergrowth. The air was cold enough that each exhale formed a small cloud. She forced herself to remain focused on the present, to ignore the prickle of fear creeping up her spine. Minutes later, she spotted something. Small impressions in the damp earth, almost hidden beneath scattered leaves. Footprints, child-sized. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She crouched to get a better look, heart pounding as she traced the outline with her eyes. They were fresh enough that the edges had not fully dissolved into mud. A child had passed this way, and recently. Her mind flashed to the last radio bulletin she'd caught at the ranger station a few days ago. Something about a missing girl named Lila Tompkins, 7 years old, last seen near the outskirts of a nearby community. Evelyn's stomach knotted. The footprints led in the same direction as the calf's tracks. She stood, scanning the area. "Is that why you brought me here?" she whispered, more to herself than to the animal. The calf merely blinked. Evelyn's throat felt tight with a mixture of hope and dread. She looked down at the footprints again, then at the calf's wounded flank. Without warning, the calf took off deeper into the forest, moving faster than before. Evelyn's heart lurched at the sudden burst of speed, her own legs stumbling to keep pace. Branches scratched against her sleeves. Fog swirled and the roar of her pulse filled her ears. Then came a sound, a faint moan that seemed to wrap around the trunks of the pines. It carried the fragility of a child's cry, barely audible but enough to make Evelyn's blood run cold. She froze, scanning the dusky air for the source. The sound faded almost as soon as she heard it, leaving her uncertain if it was real or a trick of the wind. In that moment of stillness, the calf stopped as well, turning back to face her. Its eyes shone with something that felt eerily close to understanding. A chill skittered down Evelyn's spine. Somewhere in the fog-shrouded trees, a life could be hanging by a thread. She stepped forward, voice trembling with the weight of her realization. "I'm coming," she said, as though promising both the child and the calf. "I won't leave you out here alone." Evelyn moved through the forest with cautious urgency. The temperature had dropped further, and each breath formed a small cloud that vanished into the mist. She strained to pick up any sound beyond her own footsteps and the quiet rustle of the calf ahead. Memories of radio announcements played in her mind. A lost girl, 7 years old, missing for days in unforgiving terrain. She recalled the moment she'd heard the mother pleading over the airwaves, her voice fractured with desperation. Heather Tompkins, the mother of Lila, begging for any sign of her daughter. Now, as Evelyn pursued the limping calf through the dim light, she couldn't help but see her own daughter's face superimposed on the missing girl's. The resemblance wasn't physical, it was the innocence, the vulnerability of a child in danger. A slick patch of wet leaves betrayed her footing. She lost balance and landed hard on one knee, pain shooting up her leg. She hissed in discomfort, bracing a hand against a mossy trunk. When she looked up, the calf had paused, observing her with wide eyes. For a moment she was struck by its patience. Animals typically fled at the sound of a sudden fall, yet here it stood, as though waiting for her to regain her footing. She forced a grimace that resembled a smile and pushed herself upright. She tested her knee. It throbbed, but she could still walk. "I'm all right," she muttered. "Let's keep going." The calf blinked, then turned to continue deeper into the stand of pines. Evelyn glanced around. The towering evergreens loomed overhead, their branches heavy with droplets. The canopy filtered the morning light into a muted, gray-green glow that felt like twilight. The hush of the forest heightened every sound, her labored breathing, the calf's soft panting, and the occasional crack of a twig beneath her boot. Her radio crackled again, a broken voice seeping through the static. "All units, search for Lila Tompkins." Then it fell silent. Evelyn tried to respond. "This is Ranger Marsh. I'm in pursuit of a potential lead north of the main road." The static offered no reply. She clenched her jaw. Time was precious if a child truly was out here. The thought of a little girl lost in this damp cold ignited a fierce resolve in her. The memory of her daughter haunted her. 8 years old, a sudden illness, and the helplessness that devoured Evelyn in the hospital. She wouldn't let another mother suffer that kind of loss if there was anything she could do. She moved onward, the calf guiding the way as though it had a destination in mind. Branches scraped her arms, leaving faint scratches on her sleeves. Even the forest floor seemed uneven. littered with tangled roots that threatened to trip her at every turn. Eventually, the calf slowed, ears flicking in different directions. Evelyn halted, senses on edge. In the stillness, she heard a sound, a low, pitiful whimper, more pronounced than the earlier moan she had caught. Her heart drummed in her chest. That had to be the child. She tried the radio once more, desperation edging her voice. "I've got a lead. I'm hearing a child in distress." Still no response. With no choice but to press on alone, she forced her trembling legs to move. The calf turned a bend around a thick cluster of pines. Evelyn followed and felt her stomach clench at what lay ahead. Scattered among the pine needles were footprints again, this time more distinct. Some were deep, as though made by stumbling steps. Tiny handprints marred the earth near the trunk of a gnarled tree, suggesting someone had crawled or fallen. She crouched by the prints, her breathing uneven. "Lila," she called softly into the quiet. No reply came back, only the weary hush of the wind. The calf nudged its muzzle toward the trees, as though urging her onward. She rose, ignoring the sting in her knee, and took a cautious step toward a darker patch of forest. A sudden crack of thunder made her jump, followed by a distant rumble that hinted at a coming storm. The sky above was hidden by the dense canopy, but she felt the air grow colder. The forest was about to turn even more hostile. Wind picked up, rustling the treetops and sending a dusting of pine needles swirling around her ankles. The calf lurched forward, weaving between the trunks, and Evelyn struggled to keep it in sight. She felt her pulse quicken. If a storm was on the way, the temperature could drop further, putting any lost child at grave risk. Another faint cry rippled through the air, so soft she almost doubted she heard it. She called again, voice straining against the wind. "Lila, can you hear me?" The calf's ears twitched at the sound of her shout, and Evelyn thought she saw a small figure shift in the distance. She moved faster now, ignoring the throbbing in her knee. As she rounded a large pine, her radio burst into life. "Ranger Marsh, do you copy?" It was Jake's voice, distorted but urgent. "Marsh, are you out there?" She grabbed the device, relief mingling with haste. "Jake, I'm here. I think I found her trail. North quadrant near the old pine stand." The reply was smothered by static, and then she heard him say, "Hang tight, Storm. Back up on the way." The radio fell silent again. Evelyn swallowed hard, reminded of how alone she truly was in this moment. She inhaled the damp air, steadying her nerves. A child's life could depend on her next move. She followed the calf, each step accompanied by the pounding of her own heart. The faint whimpers grew a little louder, guiding her deeper into the pines. She thought of her daughter, how she used to clutch Evelyn's hand when crossing a busy street. If only she could reach Lila in time. Evelyn steeled herself for whatever she would find ahead. Every sense sharpened, and despite the cold, sweat lined her brow. In the wind-carved silence of the forest, she prayed the child was still alive. The clearing materialized like a secret chamber within the forest, its boundaries outlined by tall, ancient pines. Through the thinning fog, Evelyn saw movement near the base of a particularly massive tree. Her pulse hammered as she approached, the calf standing beside her, its tail swishing nervously. A small figure lay on the cold ground, barely visible beneath a shroud of branches and pine needles. At first, Evelyn thought the forest debris had simply fallen there, but on closer inspection, she realized it looked deliberate. Some of the branches were carefully arranged, as though something or someone had tried to protect the child from the elements. She sank to her knees beside the figure. It was a girl, no older than 7, with chapped lips and blotches of dirt across her cheeks. Her eyes were closed, her breath so shallow that for a moment Evelyn feared she wasn't breathing at all. Evelyn gently touched the girl's forehead. "She's freezing," she whispered, alarmed by the clammy feel of her skin. The calf lowered its head, nudging a stray branch away as if confirming Evelyn's discovery. Its X-shaped scar twitched when the muscles shifted. Evelyn's heart clenched at the sight. She had never seen such behavior in an elk calf, not in all her years patrolling these forests. "Lila," Evelyn said, her voice husky with concern. The girl stirred slightly, eyelids fluttering but not fully opening. Evelyn noticed a faint bruise on Lila's temple and wondered how she had fallen or hit her head. The quiet desperation of the scene sank into Evelyn's bones. She remembered the frantic nights in the hospital, the sterile smell of antiseptic, and the moment a doctor's subdued eyes told her there was nothing more they could do. Tearing her gaze from her own memories, Evelyn focused on Lila. She had to act fast. She brushed aside the makeshift covering and unzipped her heavy jacket. With one fluid motion, she wrapped the child in the warmer interior lining. The cold air stung her arms, but she welcomed the shiver, hoping it would help keep Lila alive. She picked up her radio, voice trembling. "Jake, I have the girl. She's alive, but she's in bad shape. We need immediate medical assistance." Static returned her plea. Evelyn felt a surge of panic. "Jake, please. She's alive," she repeated. The radio sputtered a broken reply. She closed her eyes, frustration mounting. Turning her attention to Lila, Evelyn spoke softly, as though calming her own daughter in a nightmare. "Hang on, sweet girl. We'll get you out of here." She checked the child's pulse, unsteady but present. The battered condition of her clothes told a story of days spent wandering, perhaps nights exposed to the harsh elements. The elk calf took a step closer, exhaling a shaky breath. Evelyn sensed the animal's exhaustion. A part of her marveled that it had stayed with the girl, watching over her like a silent guardian. She reached out to run a hand along its neck, and the calf didn't flinch. A weak cough escaped Lila's throat, stirring pine needles. Evelyn bent lower. "Lila," she murmured again, pressing a hand gently to the child's cheek. Lila's eyes flickered open for a heartbeat, revealing a distant, glassy stare. Evelyn's own pulse skyrocketed. "That's it," she said, trying to sound calm. "Stay with me, sweetheart." In the distance, thunder rumbled, reminding Evelyn that a storm was on its way. She glanced up at the sky, the thick canopy obscuring any view of approaching dark clouds. Each minute that passed without rescue threatened Lila's life. Evelyn felt trapped between the urgent need for help and the stark reality of her radio's unreliability. She assessed the area, searching for anything that could help. The clearing was littered with broken branches and pine cones. She spotted a fallen limb sturdy enough to serve as part of a makeshift stretcher if she had to move Lila. The thought of dragging the girl through the woods alone, especially with her injured knee, felt daunting, but she would do it if that was the only option. Her breath caught when she realized Lila's eyelids were fluttering again. Her small mouth opened in a faint gasp, but no words emerged. Evelyn pressed closer, letting the girl feel the warmth of her own body. "It's okay," Evelyn whispered. "I've got you." Lila's pulse wavered under Evelyn's fingers, a fragile thump that threatened to vanish. The calf stepped nearer, so close that Evelyn could sense the fear and fatigue radiating off it. She steadied one hand against the child, the other resting lightly on the animal's flank. Suddenly, Lila's eyes rolled back and her breathing slowed to a terrifying crawl. "No, no," Evelyn pleaded, pressing her ear to the child's chest. The faint heartbeat still drummed, but it was weak. Adrenaline surged through her veins. She had to keep the girl conscious somehow. The memory of her own daughter's final hours flashed through her mind like a knife. She wouldn't let this end the same way. With trembling hands, she shifted Lila onto her side, unzipping part of her own shirt to maximize skin-to-skin contact. "Breathe," Evelyn murmured, tears burning at the corner of her eyes. "You can do this." The calf stood vigil, its presence impossibly comforting in the gloom. A spark of breath jolted through Lila's body, and she coughed again, her chest rattling with effort. Relief flooded Evelyn as she heard that fragile sound. She wrapped her arms around the girl, shielding her from the chill. Thunder rolled once more, closer this time. Evelyn tried the radio. "Jake, if you can hear me? She's alive, but in critical condition. We are in a clearing north of the main road, near a massive pine. Hurry, please!" Static filled the channel, and she slammed the radio against her thigh in desperation. She looked down at Lila's pale face, then at the calf. In the girl's half-conscious state, she might not even realize she had been found. Evelyn swallowed against a tightness in her throat. This little life depended on her calm and her resolve. The storm was coming, the radio was failing, and nightfall would only make things worse. Evelyn willed her hands to steady, brushing a damp strand of hair away from Lila's forehead. She forced a determined breath into her lungs. "I'm going to protect you," she whispered, as though speaking both to Lila and the memory of her own lost child. "Whatever it takes." Outside the circle of light beneath the towering pine, the forest seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for a choice to be made. Evelyn tightened her arms around Lila, feeling the child's heartbeat against her chest, and prepared herself to fight for a life she refused to lose again. Evelyn cradled Lila's fragile body against her own, wrapping the child in her jacket and using her own body heat as a shield against the biting cold. The wind stirred the treetops with an unsettling hum, and the distant rumble of thunder hinted at an approaching storm. The elk calf stood close, its breath shallow and visible in the chill air. Every so often its ears twitched toward the forest, as though listening for any sign of danger. Lila's lips were turning pale, and her small frame shivered beneath Evelyn's layers. A memory flickered in Evelyn's mind of tucking her daughter into bed years ago. The same desperate need to keep her child safe now pulsed through her veins, only this time the child was a stranger, a girl she had never met until an hour ago, but whose life she held in her arms. She leaned over Lila, speaking softly. "Stay with me, sweetheart," she said, her voice tremulous. "You're not alone." The girl's eyelids fluttered but did not fully open. Evelyn pressed her gloved hand lightly against Lila's cheek, alarmed at how cold her skin remained. She thought of first aid steps. Keep the victim warm, check for breathing, protect from the elements. She was doing all she could, but it felt woefully inadequate in the face of such raw wilderness. She fumbled for her radio, heart pounding. "Jake, come in," she said. The static hissed, offering no clear response. She tried a different channel. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Marsh. I've located Lila Tompkins. She's alive, but in critical condition. Need immediate medical support. Still nothing but static." Evelyn swallowed hard. "Please," she added, voice cracking under the weight of her plea. Thunder rolled again, closer than before. The sky overhead was hidden by the canopy, but she sensed the storm's dark presence creeping in. Rain or even sleet could descend at any moment, making rescue exponentially harder. She had to keep Lila conscious until help arrived, or until she figured out how to carry her to safety. But with her own knee throbbing and the terrain so treacherous, the thought of transporting an unconscious child alone felt impossible. The calf emitted a soft, almost plaintive call. Evelyn glanced at it, her breath catching in her throat. The gentle creature had guided her here, braving injury and hunger in the process. She wasn't sure if the calf understood its own extraordinary act, but the compassion radiating from its gaze was undeniable. Lila stirred, a faint gasp escaping her lips. Evelyn leaned closer. "That's it," she whispered. "Keep fighting, Lila. Help is coming." She tried to muster a confidence she didn't entirely feel. Her mind darted through possible scenarios. Maybe Jake was already on his way, tracking her radio coordinates. Maybe he'd bring a rescue team with blankets, medical gear, and a stretcher. She prayed for the sound of footsteps or helicopter rotors, anything to break the solitude. Minutes passed, dragging on like hours. Evelyn rocked Lila gently, rubbing her hands to stimulate blood flow. The wind picked up, carrying a flurry of dead leaves across the clearing. Somewhere beyond the pines, she heard a branch snap. She froze, tension knotting her shoulders, but no new figure emerged. She forced her mind to remain calm. She pictured her daughter's face, recalling the bedtime stories she used to tell in a soothing tone. Perhaps this child needed the same warmth of words. She lowered her voice, almost as though telling a lullaby. "I remember an old story about a forest spirit," she said, her tone gentle and hushed. "They say that sometimes the forest chooses who it will save, guiding them through the trees with a silent voice." Her eyes flickered to the elk calf. "Maybe that's why he's here," Evelyn whispered. "Maybe he's our guide tonight." Lila's ragged breathing hitched, but her eyes remained shut. Evelyn continued stroking her hair in steady, repetitive motions, hoping the rhythmic touch would anchor the child to consciousness. A flash of lightning lit the sky in the distance, illuminating the mist that still clung to the clearing. Evelyn braced herself for the thunder that soon followed. Lila shuddered in her arms, letting out a weak whimper. Evelyn pulled the girl closer, wishing she had brought extra blankets. She glanced around, searching for anything else she could use. Just more branches, pine cones, and soggy leaves. Then she noticed the calf's shiver. Its energy seemed depleted, eyes drooping with fatigue. "You've done so much," Evelyn murmured, filled with a strange gratitude toward the creature. She reached out and patted its neck, feeling the damp fur under her gloved hand. "I won't forget this." A low moan from Lila jolted her back to the immediate crisis. The child's face was flushed and sweaty despite the cold, a worrying sign that she might be slipping into shock or fever. Evelyn clenched her jaw, fighting off a wave of despair. Suddenly, a faint light shimmered through the fog on the far edge of the clearing. It flickered like a firefly at first, then grew brighter. Evelyn's heart leaped. She raised her head, eyes fixed on the glow. Could it be a flashlight, or maybe headlights? She heard the crackle of undergrowth being trampled, muffled by the wind. "Over here," she shouted, her voice hoarse. She repeated the call, each cry echoing against the surrounding pines. The calf's ears perked up and it shifted anxiously. Evelyn held Lila tighter. "They've found us," she said, not entirely sure if she believed it, but desperate for any glimmer of hope. As the light drew nearer, she caught sight of figures moving between the trees, dark silhouettes against the rolling fog. Relief warred with caution in her chest. She had no clue whether it was Jake's team or strangers. Still, any human presence was better than none. She straightened, ignoring her protesting knee, and waved her free hand. "Here!" she cried again, voice cracking under the strain. The wind tore at her words, scattering them into the night. But the lights advanced, bobbing in the darkness, accompanied by the crunch of footsteps against the forest floor. Evelyn let out a shaky breath, bracing herself for whatever came next. Two beams of light cut through the haze, revealing faces half hidden by shadows. Evelyn recognized Jake's features under the brim of his ranger cap, and a wave of relief washed over her so powerfully that her vision blurred. He was flanked by two other rangers, each carrying blankets and a medical bag. Jake's eyes widened at the sight of Evelyn on her knees, cradling Lila. He rushed forward, speaking quickly into his radio. "We found them," he said, voice tight with urgency. "The girl's in bad shape. Send the medics now." A second ranger, Morales, knelt beside Evelyn and gently checked Lila's vitals. He pressed a stethoscope to her chest, brow creasing at the faint heartbeat. "She's still with us," he confirmed in a subdued tone, then reached into the medical bag for a thermal blanket. Evelyn exhaled a shaky breath of relief. Jake carefully touched Evelyn's shoulder. "You look like you're about to collapse," he said, his concern evident. "How bad are you hurt?" "My knee," Evelyn managed, swallowing against the lump in her throat. "I'll survive. Lila needs help more than I do." Her voice trembled and exhaustion lined her face, yet she refused to let go of the child until Morales eased Lila from her arms. That was the moment the elk calf spooked. Surrounded by unfamiliar humans, it backed away, eyes wild. The X-shaped scar on its flank twitched with each startled step. Evelyn reached out a hand instinctively. "It's okay," she whispered. "They're here to help." But the calf let out a distressed huff, turning to bolt toward the tree line. "Wait," Jake called, as if he could hold back the frightened creature with words alone. It vanished into the swirling mist, leaving only the echo of its hooves. Evelyn's heart tightened. For a moment she wanted to chase after it, to thank it or comfort it, but her body refused to move. Morales tucked the thermal blanket around Lila, handing another to Evelyn. "She needs immediate treatment," he said, pressing gauze to a cut on Lila's arm. "We have to keep her as warm as possible until the ambulance arrives." Jake helped Evelyn to her feet, supporting her weight when she wobbled. "You really went off the grid, Marsh," he said, attempting a half-smile that failed to mask his concern. "You had us all worried." Evelyn's gaze flickered to Lila's unconscious form. The child's lips were a faint shade of blue, but she was breathing in shallow, ragged intervals. "I had no choice," Evelyn muttered. "Something led me here. That calf, I couldn't ignore it." Jake nodded, tightening his grip on her arm to keep her steady. "You did the right thing. Now let's get both of you out of this storm." A flash of lightning illuminated the clearing. Thunder rumbled, vibrating through the ground. The team moved quickly, readying a makeshift stretcher for Lila. Evelyn's head spun, partly from relief and partly from the toll of the freezing cold. As they lifted Lila onto the stretcher, Evelyn tried to follow on foot, but her injured knee buckled. Jake caught her just in time. "Easy," he said, worry creasing his forehead. "We've got Lila now. Let Morales and Coleman handle the stretcher." Evelyn swayed, fighting a wave of dizziness. The adrenaline that had sustained her finally began to ebb, leaving her body weak. She looked at Lila, swaddled under blankets, her small hand peeking out. Evelyn reached for it, gently squeezing. The girl's fingers twitched in response, a faint sign of life. Morales lifted the radio to his mouth. "Coordinates locked in," he said to the dispatcher on the other end. "We're moving them to the nearest access point for the ambulance." Then he glanced at Evelyn. "Can you walk, or do you need a carrier?" "I'll walk," Evelyn muttered, though every joint screamed in protest. Jake slid an arm around her waist, supporting her as they began the slow journey back. The forest was transformed by the storm's approach. Shadows danced across the ground, and the wind whistled through the branches. Rain began to fall, tapping the leaves in a rhythmic urgency. Evelyn shuddered against Jake's side, torn between relief that Lila was found and apprehension about what condition she would be in once they reached proper medical care. They inched through the undergrowth, boots slipping on the slick ground. Coleman at the front of the stretcher barked directions, trying to find a path clear of fallen limbs. The flashlight beams cut zigzags through the dark, guiding them between pines and over uneven terrain. With each step, the thunder sounded closer. Evelyn stole a last glance at the clearing. The calf was gone. She felt an unexpected pang of loss, remembering how it had looked back at her moments before fleeing. "He saved her," she whispered, uncertain if Jake could hear. "He led me straight to her." Jake's response was tender, spoken against the roar of the wind. "I believe you." Then he urged her forward, helping her follow Morales and Coleman. The group pressed on, the world around them illuminated sporadically by lightning. At last, they reached a narrow trail where the ground leveled out. The radio crackled with an update. An ambulance was en route, waiting near a ranger checkpoint a short distance away. Morales and Coleman pushed faster, Lila's stretcher jostling over roots and ruts. Each movement elicited a faint whimper from the girl, but she remained unconscious. Evelyn's heart clenched. She prayed they weren't too late. When they finally emerged from the forest's grasp, a pair of ambulance lights pierced the gloom. Paramedics rushed forward, hauling out medical gear. Morales carefully transferred Lila into their care. Jake guided Evelyn closer, keeping a firm arm around her waist. She watched as the paramedics strapped Lila to a gurney, checking her vital signs under the harsh beam of a portable lamp. One called out, "She's got a pulse, but it's weak. We need to stabilize her temperature." They bundled the child with heated blankets, an oxygen mask gently placed over her mouth and nose. Evelyn felt her vision blur, tears mingling with the cold rain on her cheeks. Relief collided with lingering fear. She let go of Jake's arm, her knees threatening to give out. "She's alive," she whispered, voice tight with emotion. "She's going to be okay." Jake caught her as she sagged, exhaustion finally taking over. "Hang in there, Marsh," he said quietly, guiding her into the ambulance. "Let's get you both to the hospital." As she settled on the edge of a seat, the doors slammed shut, and the ambulance roared to life, siren echoing through the storm-laden air. Evelyn closed her eyes, the image of the elk calf burning in her mind. Its gentle, haunting gaze lingered even as the ambulance sped away. For the first time since her daughter's death, she felt a spark of hope that perhaps not all was lost. Days passed in a blur of hospital corridors, fluorescent lights, and the antiseptic smell that clung to everything. Evelyn found herself in a cramped waiting room, knee bandaged and propped on a small stool, sipping tepid coffee as she waited for updates on Lila's condition. The rescue had been successful, but Lila's outcome was still uncertain. Eventually, a nurse approached with a gentle smile. "She's awake," the woman said. "Would you like to see her?" Evelyn's heart flooded with relief. She stood too quickly, a jolt of pain shooting through her knee. Still, she followed the nurse's steady pace down the hallway. In the small hospital room, Lila lay swaddled in blankets. Her cheeks had regained some color, though she still looked far too fragile. Heather Tompkins, Lila's mother, hovered beside the bed, eyes rimmed with red. She clutched her daughter's hand as if afraid to let go. Heather turned at the sound of the door opening. Her posture was tense, but her eyes softened when she saw Evelyn. You're the ranger who found her," she whispered. Evelyn nodded, feeling self-conscious under the intensity of the woman's gaze. Heather stepped forward, tears brimming. "They said you carried her most of the way, risked your own life. I can't ever repay you." Her voice broke on the last syllable, and she clung to Evelyn in a trembling hug. Caught off guard, Evelyn hesitated, then returned the embrace tentatively. She thought of her own daughter, imagining how things might have been if she'd had the chance to see her recover from that final illness. The memory stung, but standing here holding a grateful mother also brought a measure of solace. "It's my job," Evelyn managed, gently stepping back. "I'm just glad she's all right." She approached the bed where Lila peered up at her through half-lidded eyes. An oxygen tube ran beneath the girl's nose, and an IV drip fed medication into her arm. Lila's voice was barely audible. "I remember it was really cold." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "And then, you were there." Evelyn's throat constricted with emotion. "Yes, honey, you were lost, but you're safe now." She reached out and squeezed Lila's small hand. The child squeezed back, a frail but determined gesture. Jake knocked gently on the door and stepped inside. "Got room for one more visitor?" he asked, glancing between them. He offered Lila a faint smile. "Glad to see you looking better." Heather wiped her tears, attempting a more composed front. "Thank you, both of you," she said, "for finding her, for bringing her back to me." Jake nodded, glancing at Evelyn. "She did the brunt of the work," he said. "I just showed up late to the party." His tone was light, but the admiration in his eyes was clear. Evelyn found she couldn't meet his gaze for long. She cleared her throat and turned back to Lila. "How do you feel?" "Warmer," Lila whispered. She shifted her arms beneath the blankets. "I had a dream that a baby elk was with me." A flicker of surprise crossed Evelyn's face. "It wasn't a dream," she said gently. "He was really there. He helped lead me to you." Lila blinked, her lip quivering. "I remember him nudging me. He was soft." She trailed off, exhaustion pulling her eyelids closed. Heather took her hand again, smoothing the child's hair with the other. Jake moved to Evelyn's side. "You should get some rest yourself," he said, concern evident in his voice. "You look like you haven't slept since the rescue." "Feels like it," Evelyn muttered, rolling her stiff shoulder. Her knee still throbbed, but she'd barely noticed in the whirlwind of hospital visits and updates on Lila's recovery. She turned to Heather. "She'll be okay, right?" Heather nodded, fresh tears slipping down her cheeks. "The doctor said she just needs time to recover from exposure and dehydration. No permanent damage. She's going to be fine." Her voice quivered with gratitude. Evelyn exhaled a long, relieved breath. Glancing at the child's pale face, she felt a pang of wistful longing, imagining a future she never got to have with her own daughter. "I'm really glad to hear it," she said softly. A short while later, Jake accompanied her into the hallway. He pulled something out of his pocket, a small medallion on a broken chain. "Found this in the forest," he said, holding it out to her. "It has initials on the back. EM, is this yours?" Evelyn stared at it, heart catching in her throat. It was the medallion her daughter had given her for Mother's Day so many years ago. She had taken to wearing it under her uniform, a private token of love she couldn't part with. She hadn't even realized it was missing. She took it from his hand, tears pricking her eyes. I must have lost it when—" her voice faltered. Thank you. Jake gave her a small nod of understanding. You did good out there, Marsh. Don't ever doubt it. He paused, then cleared his throat. A local wildlife rehab center says they might have found an elk calf with a leg injury and an odd scar. Could be our friend. Evelyn's heart fluttered. He's alive? Seems so. They'll confirm soon, but I thought you might want to know. She clutched the medallion, feeling its cool metal bite into her palm. I do, she said, voice thick with a mixture of relief and lingering sorrow. A strange sense of purpose filled her, a realization that her connection to this calf and to Lila wasn't just a chance event. Jake patted her shoulder. Rest first. Then we can see about our little hero. Evelyn nodded, the prospect of visiting the calf stirring something hopeful in her chest. For the first time in years, she felt as though she was on the verge of healing from wounds she had believed would never close. Several weeks later, winter's grip loosened just enough for a thin beam of sunlight to pierce through the forest canopy. Evelyn stood beside Lila at the edge of a fenced enclosure within the wildlife rehab center. The air was still chilly, but no longer biting. Heather watched from a short distance, arms folded across her chest as if trying to contain her emotions. Inside the enclosure, the elk calf limped cautiously around a patch of grass. A small bandage covered part of its hind leg where a veterinarian had treated an infection, and the once prominent X-shaped scar had been cleaned and checked. A gentle caretaker, wearing thick gloves, held a clipboard and observed the calf's progress. Evelyn couldn't tear her gaze away from the young elk. She recalled the night in the clearing, how he had stood watch over Lila, how he had guided her through the fog. It still felt surreal, as if the forest had conspired to bring them together. Lila approached the fence quietly, her eyes lighting up with recognition. Heather exhaled. It's incredible, she said. He looks so much stronger now. Evelyn nodded, remembering the trembling creature she had followed through the mist. He's a fighter, she replied, just like Lila. The caretaker beckoned them closer. We've tracked his recovery and he's almost ready for release, the woman said, offering a warm smile. Would you like to see him up close? Lila's face lit with excitement, and she looked up at her mother for permission. Heather hesitated only a moment before nodding. The caretaker led them to a small gate where the calf stood, ears flicking in curiosity. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest, an odd combination of pride and tenderness. She gently rested her hand on the wooden railing. Hello again, she said, her voice scarcely above a whisper. The calf shifted, then took a few tentative steps closer, sniffing the air. Lila giggled softly. He remembers you, she said, her voice brimming with awe. The calf bowed its head as if acknowledging them. Heather hovered protectively, yet she couldn't help smiling at the sight. They spent a few moments in quiet communion with the creature. Then the caretaker cleared her throat. We'll release him with a tracking device in the next few days. Rangers will monitor his integration back into the wild. Hopefully he'll find a herd or adapt on his own. Evelyn nodded, a surge of relief flowing through her. She felt a strong sense of closure, as though a chapter of her life had found its last page. Thank you, she said to the caretaker. Over the subsequent days, Evelyn learned to walk with less pain, her knee healing steadily. She settled back into her cabin near the Willamette Forest, grateful for the routine of ranger patrols that once seemed suffocating. This time, though, the forest felt different, alive with possibilities rather than weighed down by her grief. True to the caretaker's words, the elk calf was released at dawn on a bright, crisp morning. Evelyn stood with Jake and a small handful of rangers, watching from a safe distance. When the enclosure door opened, the calf stepped out onto the dewy grass, ears flicking at every sound. Then, with surprising grace, he made his way toward the tree line. He paused once, glancing back as if to say goodbye, before disappearing among the pines. Evelyn inhaled, the cool air filling her lungs with renewed hope. She exchanged a glance with Jake, who offered her a nod of quiet admiration. Their silent acknowledgement felt like a promise that they would both keep looking out for the forest's newest survivor. In the weeks that followed, life assumed a gentle rhythm. Lila regained her strength and began visiting Evelyn after school, drawn by curiosity and gratitude. Heather accompanied her at first, anxious to keep her daughter close, but eventually trusted Lila to walk the short trail to Evelyn's cabin on her own. The girl would show up holding sketches of animals she wanted to share, or stories about the forest that filled her imagination. One sunny afternoon, as Lila sat on a stump outside the cabin, she lifted her gaze to the towering pines around them. "Do you think he's okay?" she asked, referring to the elk calf. "Do you think he's lonely?" Evelyn knelt beside her, meeting the child's eyes. "He's in his home," she said gently. "The forest is full of hidden paths and other elk. He's stronger now, and I believe he can take care of himself." Lila nodded, pondering the words. "Sometimes I dream about him," she confessed, "and about how cold I was. And then you were there." Evelyn reached for Lila's hand. "I'm glad I was. We both got a second chance that day." She squeezed Lila's fingers, grateful for this strange, unexpected bond they now shared. Later that evening, Evelyn ventured alone into the forest, following a familiar route beneath the pine canopy. Dappled light filtered through the branches, illuminating patches of moss and scattered cones. She paused near the clearing where she had first found Lila, memories rushing back like a tide. For a moment she felt a pang of old sorrow, but it was tempered by a sense of peace. She heard a soft rustle behind her. Turning, she found the elk calf standing just a few yards away, half concealed by the shadows. The tracking collar was visible against its fur. Her breath caught. She hadn't expected to see him so soon. She approached with slow steps, heart thudding. He didn't bolt. Instead, he allowed her near, and she realized how much he had grown in strength. She extended a cautious hand. He sniffed her fingers, then dipped his head, an echo of the tender moment they shared when she first followed him into the mist. A smile trembled on her lips. The forest around them breathed in a quiet hush, as though giving them space to acknowledge each other. Evelyn felt an unspoken understanding pass between them. Gratitude, respect, and the knowledge that they had saved each other in ways neither could fully express. After a minute, the calf turned and slipped back into the shadows. Evelyn watched, her heart full. She stood still, listening to the soft sound of his hooves fading into the brush. Then she made her way back to her cabin, each step lighter than the last. That night, as she prepared her gear for the next patrol, she glanced at the medallion on her bedside table. A pang of sadness mingled with acceptance. She was at peace with the memory of her daughter, secure in the knowledge that she had finally been able to save a child's life, and in doing so, rediscover something vital within herself. A few days later, as dawn broke over the Willamette forest, she embarked on a morning patrol. Slivers of golden light cut through the mist, illuminating her path. She thought of Lila, safe at home, and the elk calf who roamed these woods, free once again. She whispered softly into the quiet, her voice carried by the wind. Sometimes the forest decides who must be saved and who needs to find their way back to life. Then she stepped forward, deeper into the pines, ready for whatever new call awaited her in the hush of the morning light.